the sessions this morning that have really set out the why and what it is we're trying to achieve. This panel discussion at the moment for the next 30 minutes is all about how we're going to understand from other people in industry how to achieve change using the IMI, the Information Management Initiative. So before we dive in any particular detail, I'm just going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Varun, would you like to go first? Just a couple of seconds.
Yeah, I'm Varun. I am a director at the Property Smart Group. We have a development arm and a consultancy arm and a lettings arm. So I'll be looking at it today really from the development and lifecycle management side of things.
Excellent, thank you. And Sarah?
Hello, I'm Sarah Davidson. I'm a professor at the University of Nottingham. So I'm here to give a view from academia.
Excellent. And Pete?
Hi everyone, I hope you can all hear me. My name is Pete Burchill. I'm a professional head of discipline for BIM within AtkinsRealis. I'm also fortunate enough to be the global chair of the Information Management Global Technical Network.
Excellent. Okay, and Andy hasn't managed to join us yet, but hopefully he'll join us very soon. Andy is the digital lead for construction at ALEC Construction in the Middle East. As Paul introduced, thank you very much, Paul. My name's Casey Rutland. I'm chair of Building Smart UK and Ireland, but also run a digital transformation consultancy out in the Middle East also. Okay, so you may have heard this morning, you've been introduced to the Information Management Initiative, which is designed to make information management accessible and actionable. But what we've recognised through the many years is that change only happens when people recognise the need. And with the why mostly covered, as we said in the previous sessions, I'd still like to take an observation from some of our panelists. So Sarah, we'll jump in with you first. We've always been talking about upskilling and academia. So how do you find that academia and training pathways currently prepare people for the realities of information management in modern practice?
Yeah, so I can't obviously speak for academia as a whole. I anticipate that it's an improving picture, given that we've been talking about information management for so long now, and we've had a reboost of discussion since the launch of ISO 19650 series around information management. And of course, we've got the IMI and the guidance that sits beneath all of that. But what I would say is that when we look at programs and modules within academia that are to do with the built environment, then all of them will have some degree of space, not very much, I would say, but some degree of space to start developing some preparedness. It might be very small steps that you have to do, because programs are very much governed by the degree to which they're accredited, and then the learning outcomes that are set by those accrediting bodies. But with some imagination, you can, for all built environment programs, introduce some level of preparedness, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's valuable in partly bridging that gap between the academic side and professional practice. Varun, we already know that there's a gap in terms of what the standards say and what actually is managed day to day. There's an absolute by the book rule and then a pragmatic approach. What would you say the biggest gap was?
I think certainly where I've moved into this scope of property development, one of the biggest gaps that I've started to see is the intent against implementation. So where we start thinking about, the standards that we recognise, like ISO 19650, the IMI framework, on live projects, the day-to-day pressures of delivery, they often override the requirements of structured information management. So what we're starting to see is that even though we've got very good consultants that are all au fait with the standards and have the digital tools that are available, data quite quickly becomes quite fragmented. And what we do see is all the data is held in silos. And this stems from when we purchase a site all the way to when we go through planning, design, and then even when we're going into construction. That then makes it very hard to make confident decisions. And the real challenge isn't about understanding the standards for us. It's about how we actually embed this into behaviours. And once we've got everybody thinking and treating information as an asset, that's when we're going to see more accurate, structured data driving better design coordination, better decisions, and giving people like myself as a client more confidence in terms of the standards that are actually being used in everyday practice.
Yeah, it's that pragmatic approach, isn't it, that I think we need to focus on. So whilst Andy still hasn't joined us, I think there was a question for him to acknowledge in terms of the constructor's perspective. But it does lead on to the next section. Really, once we've raised that awareness and we've understood and appreciated that there's a difference between skills and the things people need to know, from my perspective, the change really happens in the creating desire and the need to change. Not from a business perspective all the time, but sometimes from an individual perspective, from a people perspective. Some of us were in a NEMA strategy day yesterday, and someone raised the option or the idea of creating FOMO. And I think that's, again, something we're missing out on as NEMA and as the Information Management Initiative. Is probably quite a good idea, is to try and understand how we can create that fear of missing out and engage people to want to do this for their own personal benefit, project benefit, and company benefit. So again, Varun, to you, what are the tangible benefits or incentives that would persuade site and project teams to adopt the principles that are in the IMI, rather than what a lot of people tend to do is see them as extras or over and above something else as a tick box exercise?
I think the main motivation comes from the fact that we can reduce friction and start delivering certainty in projects. Certainly where you look at development schemes and where you're looking being on site, when we've got data that flows efficiently from early feasibility all the way through to handover, it ends up saving us a lot of time, a lot of cost. Something simple like structured naming conventions, version control, it helps to eliminate errors between a design team and a cost consultant being able just to give us the right quantities and costings against the right drawings. Something very simple, but these directly translate into faster approvals, fewer workarounds, and fewer reworks. What we do tend to find is where we start highlighting the commercial benefits, we start being able to see fewer disputes, clear audit trails, and better visibility of progress. And that really helps where we look at our investment, our investment partners that are on board, because then they get that certainty as well.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the IMI principles are not about paperwork. They're about being able to let everyone's lives be easier. When the team's got good information management, what it does is it helps unlock things for us like funding milestones, speeding up decisions, and those become performance drivers, because we can use that as motivation to say, well, if we can hit these milestones earlier, if we can hit these funding targets earlier, there's monetary and value incentives for yourselves as well. So that's been a real incentive for us produce more efficiency, transparency, and in turn it ends up reducing less risk for us on projects, which is great.
Yeah, it's a great idea. And I think what we're looking for is, from my practice in what I've done, it's kind of allowing things like as simple as allowing people to go home on time, not repeating and doing that trudge work that a lot of people end up doing on projects, and that repetitive, boring stuff. Pete, I'm going to jump to you now. Is there anything that's worked inside your organisation to align the leadership with the teams that are working on projects around a shared digital vision and information management vision?
Yeah, I mean, first off, thanks for having me here, Casey. It's a real privilege. So thank you very much. I think for us, like, one of the key challenges is that it's recognising that a lot of what we can do in the IAM space is around mitigating risks and reducing waste. And sometimes that can be a somewhat difficult business case to prove. You know, we've got lots of evidence bases of where poor information management have led to things going wrong, which has had a negative impact on a business or a project. The challenge is that can be seen as quite an adversarial way to kind of approach teams and to approach the business as a whole. There was a really, really great quote in one of the earlier sessions by Gary Bell, which kind of resonates more with how we're trying to approach things now, which is trying to tell that story that actually the information is one of the few assets that starts to appreciate with age. So if you set out well and look after that asset information, it can start to give the business real kind of ROI, and that really helps with that sort of senior leadership understanding and willingness and buy-in to drive a more information management focused way of approaching things. I think once you start talking about delivery teams, case studies are really important, and there's a really good piece of work that KPMG did with AtkinsRealis around the potential upside of investment in information management for UK infrastructure. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend you track it down. But those are kind of they're very kind of national case studies, and I think what's really important and what really helps us is when we can find real case studies that resonate with the teams. And if you look at kind of what's in the sort of the kind of the step one principles around that idea, it's not just about optimizing value. The impact we can have on health and safety, social, environmental, and kind of the economic side of things. I think if you can find case studies that align with those principles, you actually start to see the project teams really buying in and engaging. And I think also, to what I would say from a really positive perspective, nowadays, businesses are getting far more data savvy, far more information savvy. More and more it's about wider business processes. They're starting to see the benefits of data, and they want to get some of that. So we're getting a pull from different parts of the businesses now. They want to see the information, they want to see the data, and they want it to be good quality. And I think like the opportunities downstream are growing at a hugely accelerated rate. So actually, we feel like the pull is getting bigger from a lot of our clients and from our internal parts of the business. And so all of that drives kind of a shared kind of common purpose and alignment.
Yeah, and I think something you picked up on there is downstream opportunities. And I think what we're all seeing is that creating standardized data through the ISO 19650 process and the IMI allows those other things to happen, or as possibilities. Sarah, is there anything in academia, professional bodies or universities that kind of introduces that enabler of innovation approach rather than the bureaucratic approach, which a lot of people tend to see it as?
So I think the first thing, Casey, I did mention or sort of alluded it to before, but if a program is accredited by the RICS or the RIBA or the ICE or whoever, then those professional bodies are absolutely fundamental in driving the extent to which there's an exploration of information management. So that's the first thing. I think we need to look at the professional bodies. But in terms of how you can develop more of an engaged attitude and an innovative attitude rather than one that's based on bureaucracy. I think a lot of the time students have had limited experience of working in the built environment, or perhaps even no experience of the built environment. So you're trying to embed them into an environment that they're not familiar with. And so you need to think about how you can simulate things that happen in real life so that they're enjoyable and fun, but so that students understand the challenges and the risks of not paying attention to information management. So I think Varun mentioned earlier, keep it simple. So we can do some really simple things. For instance, if a student is creating some design in modeling, we can schedule all components and models, and we can get them to check where they might have changed the dimension for a window, for instance, but actually they've named that differently, but the dimensions and the name don't tie up. So there are things that you can do like that, and I think that makes students aware very quickly that, oh yeah, my information's incorrect. And the other thing is that we need to develop students' understanding that when they go out into industry, in whatever arena they go into, then they're not working by themselves, they're working as part of a team. And so we can look at how we develop their understanding of what happens with their information. Just very simple questions around, who do you think is going to use your information, or how many people do you think are going to use your information? Of course, there isn't a right answer to that. But if they start to say, well, probably one or two, then that's likely to be an incorrect answer, and that gives you the ability to talk around. But then we can do exercises that are quite fun but are very typical of what happens, so you can simulate email exchanges between lots of different people and say, okay, well, how many instances of some information exists, who's got the right information, and nobody ever gets the right answer. And that challenges students to really think about how information is being exchanged. And of course, in the environment where we're in now, we're getting information coming from all types of directions, and that creates a lot of pressure. So if you can promote the idea of generating information and sharing it in a very responsible way, and sharing it in a way that doesn't mean that you're recreating it, but that you are giving somebody access to it, and getting students to do things such as configure common data environments to name the information that they generate in a certain way. That will get students on board. You can even ask them, and I did this the other day actually, I said, set out an information requirement for me for your degree certificate. So they start to understand, well, what information does that degree certificate need to show? Who's going to use it? What's it going to be relied upon for? What format do I need to receive that in? And you start to talk a language then that students understand. So I'm not talking about exchange information requirements, but I'm getting them to think about how they rely on information and how important it is to them as well. So there's lots that we can do, but we need you need imagination to do that. And of course you would say, well, if there's not imagination in universities, then where is there imagination? But the ongoing engagement with industry and with leadership as well from professional bodies is absolutely fundamental.
Yeah, and so that's really moving into the area where we've said, okay, we've created the awareness. Nima's done a great job of industry understanding that it's got to move on. We've created desire. We want to get people excited about this. What are the opportunities? And now we're turning it into knowledge. How do we upskill people? And there is clearly a role for academia, as you said, and ongoing through people's careers. How do we get to the point where there is adequate training that manages to keep up the pace of change of technology to do those things? So Pete, how do you think we can simplify those technical aspects of information standards so that they're usable for the everyday engineer, project manager, consultant, client, or whoever they may be? Thanks
for the question. I think let's be really honest. Fundamentally, it is quite a complex world, as Sarah's just alluded to. It's it is quite a challenge for us all to do this. I think picking up on Sarah's point around being able to articulate technical requirements in a language that lands with your particular audience is a really important part of that simplification. So making sure that we reconcile the language we want to use in a repeatable, consistent way, and how that resonates with audit functions, project delivery managers, engineers, scientists, all of our teams that we work with. I think there's a really important element of that around contract terminology, and obviously the protocol has done a really good job there. But I still feel like there's space for us to improve around alignment on contract terminology, around how we articulate the technical requirements that we're expecting of our supply chains. Once you start talking about delivery teams, I think it's really important to play out a summary of kind of what your objectives are, which goes back to the previous point around what's in it for them, and then build those requirements and build an understanding of the technical requirements that achieve that kind of outcome. I'm a big fan of pictures painting 1,000 words. So if we can lay out stuff diagrammatically, that kind of always helps us. And I think once you start looking at things like automation, you can start to eliminate some of those technical challenges. So workflows in common data environments that gets rid of the really, really mundane kind of metadata changes and things like that. And then once we start talking about having to deliver very, very significant asset data sets or environmental data sets, potentially you start having dedicated teams to support the more general engineering delivery teams. But I do feel that sometimes runs the risk of kind of creating some siloing. And going back to that point of kind of finding what's in it for them, what we are, some of the benefits we're getting is if we can get the buy-in, the level of simplification sometimes isn't quite as great as maybe you think it might be. And actually you have really, really great outcomes because your teams start living and breathing the kind of IMI principles and start understanding, okay, so what's this bit of data? And then you get really interesting conversations around, oh, okay, so now actually this data helps for, and you start getting a line of sight, and that happens at the individual level rather than us as an organization understanding what we're trying to achieve. And you start becoming a team of IMI players rather than, an IMI team trying to force a wider engineering delivery team to kind of meet the requirements. So I think if we can get the buy-in, the level of simplification required drops away, and actually you get better outcomes as a business.
Exactly. And I think what you're describing there is moving through from the knowledge, the understanding, and a bit of training to actually an ability, an experience, and a proven way of working.
And desire.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah, and as Sarah said, it's when we have graduates coming out, that it's very much a solo learning process. But once you land up on site, suddenly you're in a team. Yeah. And I don't think that's necessarily taught in as many institutions as possible as it should be. And I think that's where, if I can lead on to the next topic of ability, what governance or tool sets do you think, Pete, make information flow more reliable across multidisciplinary teams?
So I think there's several levels in terms of we've had really good experience in terms of governance of the overall project. We've worked very, very hard to build internal systems that look at the kind of provide, if you like, an IMI overlay to our general business process. So starting to understand what's necessary at each different part of the project delivery process. And so we have a global framework that sets out kind of core principles and provides a host location for kind of regional templates and standard operating procedures. And we think of that as like a library. And then we actually built some internal tools, because sort of 4 or 5 years ago, we felt they weren't in place, that kind of integrate that into our wider BMS. So it starts serving up those templates and guidance at the right point in the project delivery process. And we found that's really helped us make sure we're thinking from an IMI perspective. We're thinking, there were some of the comments made in some of the earlier sessions around looking at the maturity of teams and kind of, have they got experience? Have they thought about how IMI type processes could help them deliver? And we now kind of, through our kind of IMF implementation tools, we have this idea of kind of carrying out a digital challenge, and we've had some really good results with that. I think once you then kind of go within that kind of project level down to kind of like actual kind of engineering delivery teams, there's a raft of digital tool sets that are around that really help that multidisciplinary sharing of information. We're a broad, very, very broad church driven by both client and regional requirements. So the likes of Revisto, iTwin, Navisworks, all of those tools, all of those help massively in terms of actually enabling teams to understand how their contribution to the scheme fits into that wider context. And then, of course, that's underpinned by a foundation layer of EDMSs and CDEs. And again, without that, we're just lost. There's no way we can deliver these projects nowadays without those tool sets, and they're getting better and better at allowing teams to understand how other disciplines kind of how the context of how their design fits into other designs. In terms of what do we give to our teams around these tools to help them, well, that IMF library kind of hosts kind of a lot of standard operating procedures, but what we find is the challenge nowadays is how do we keep pace with the rate of change of the tools? The tools are evolving and improving so quickly now. Actually, documentation, as we all kind of used to think about it, kind of isn't fit for purpose, and it's more in the kind of wikis and videos and stuff like that. And that really seems to be the only mechanism by which we can keep pace and make sure that our processes and workflows and our enablers of teams to work with each other keep pace with what the technology can do. I hope that kind of answers some of your question a bit there, Casey.
It does, and I'd like to ask Sarah her opinion, because as we've identified, that there is such a plethora solutions and in digital terms for all sorts of different tasks we do. So Sarah, do you think there's any way of industry more usefully and helpfully collaborating with universities and education establishments to enable graduates and anyone really going on a training course to come out and hit the ground running?
So certainly in Nottingham, we have a significant amount of industrial collaboration. So it's absolutely fundamental to us developing graduates who can go into engineering or architecture. And that collaboration is essential. Keeping up with the tools is quite challenging. They are moving at pace. And so, but also the thing that strikes me is that actually the way that students think and the skills that they have, their IT literacy, is also moving at pace. So if you can develop a student's skill, for instance, or you can develop their knowledge around a naming convention, and then you can develop their skill in a platform that is used in industry, so they realize they're getting an education in something that is worthwhile. But if you can develop their skill in a platform, in how to configure that platform, to be able to check against the naming convention, to be able to put some workflow in that will either that will check and accept or reject. My feeling and my experience has been that students are agile enough to be able to take that bit of knowledge, put them into a working environment that might be slightly different, that might be working with a slightly different platform, but they can take that knowledge and they can learn how to apply it. I think it's really important that we give students the understanding that we cannot educate them in every piece of software. But what we can do is we can develop their knowledge and skill enough so that they have confidence, so that they can then go out into industry. They can watch what's going on behind them, around them, and they can be confident enough to implement what they have learned, but also to think about how they develop that. So it really is setting some context for them and making sure that they understand that we're giving them that really good framework, that really good starting point. But it's not everything. They're never going to know everything. But that collaboration with industry, you know, universities can do things like set up industrial advisory boards. We have people coming into University of Nottingham every single week from industry to talk to our students to develop their skills in something. We have honorary professors and fellows who we lean to. For instance, Emma Hooper is an honorary fellow from the University of Nottingham, and we can draw on their knowledge, their expertise to think, okay, well, how do we shape courses? What practical experiences and examples can we put in here? I think that as academics, this, you know, you have FOMO, you definitely have FOMO of not understanding what's going on in the outside world, because you're not in there practicing it all of the time. So we too have just got to have the confidence in what we're doing and know that we're confident in the development of knowledge and the ability to practice and the development of confidence.
Yeah,
I think it's challenging for everybody. You just believe in yourself to a degree, and you've got to have that collaboration. It's fundamental.
Keeping it relevant and fresh as possible within the boundaries of what you're able to do.
Yeah.
Quite wary of time. We are out of time, unfortunately. I've seen questions from Benjamin and from Kevin in the chat. We'll deal with those in the chat room afterwards if you want to come and join us, and we'll answer those then. I'd like to finish, Varun, heads up, with just one possible, if you can complete this sentence for me. Achieving change through the IMI will require us to
make structured information the background of or the backbone of every development decision that you make. Turning data into a living asset, I think, is probably one of the most important things to drive quality and value, but also drive confidence in our industry.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much to our panelists. You can all join us in the session in the chat room afterwards, and we'll discuss these things more. Over to you, Paul.